Sense. Well, perfect. We like to get started right at 2:03, so a few minutes after the hour. So we're gonna get going. Um, you know what I realized is that I actually interviewed you 3 years ago, almost to the week, because I was new in climate and I started this thing called Sustainability Snacks. And I was like, I wonder if people will talk to me for 15 minutes and make little short form little clips. And you were one of the, I think maybe the first or one of the very first people who responded to me. We did a little like 10-minute interview and talked about sustainability snacks.
I didn't realize it was to the week, but yes, I
Yeah,
do remember that.
yeah, there we go. Now we're turning that snack into a full-time meal here. Um, so I wanted to start actually maybe even with a similar question that we talked about 3 years ago, but I think it's interesting. You came into the ESG role from a kind of operations, like business ops function beforehand, which is not very common. I think a lot of people come into it, especially in the software industry, from legal or maybe finance. Maybe they came from HR, but I think business ops is a little less common. What do you think are the advantages to your background being in operations? And what did you have to kind of learn anew when you got started?
I think about this a lot, and I think coming into sustainability from a biz ops background means that I was always very good at working collaboratively, working cross functionally. It's just that my work now in sustainability has an additional perspective on top of it, an additional layer of focus, but the functions are largely the same. I've always been working with influence and very little authority, always been working cross functionally, always bringing together disparate groups to work towards a single goal. Yeah, it's just that that goal now is focused in sustainability rather than in replatforming.
Yeah. Were there then taking that, like, who do you work the closest with, and how's that changed over the last 4 years since you started doing ESG? Because 4 years ago, when you started this work, a lot of ESG, I'm curious what it was at New Relic, but a lot of it sat under human resources. A lot of it was talked about as employee engagement as a core reason for doing this. Maybe compliance was on the horizon, but it certainly wasn't quite there yet. Um, Maybe some larger enterprise customers were asking for some stuff, but it certainly wasn't at the level it was today. Who were your closest collaborators 4 years ago? And then how does that evolve?
Yeah, well, I mean, in terms of my reporting line, I've now in the ESG role reported into first our chief operating officer, then our chief people officer. And now I do report into legal. I report into our general counsel and our chief business and strategy officer. So I've reported into all of the different functions that you named in my ESG journey. Um, I would say because we are in what I think about as a real season of compliance, I have been spending quite a bit more time with my legal colleagues, a lot more time talking to my colleagues on the cloud optimization team, because yeah, we are preparing to comply with some emerging regulations, and so they're the ones that I have been spending the most time with. I would say I've always been, a partner to our sales organization, always wanting to make sure that I am understanding the needs of our customers, and articulating those needs to the rest of the business, through a sustainability lens. And then always trying to make sure that I'm staying connected to our general employee population and understanding, their interests as well, and speaking to those.
Do those different departments, HR taking care of employees, IT taking care of cloud data centers, legal taking care of compliance issues, do they all need the same core bit of information from you or the same thing from you, but in three different ways? Or do they each need something very, very different from you? Like, I guess, are you taking the same work and just remixing it for what they need? Or are you doing three streams of work for three different departments?
I don't think it's as severe as restreaming. I think I'm always making some sort of a stew and there's different ingredients in it on any given day, depending on who I'm talking to. Um, I think about it, I think more that, depending on the colleague I'm speaking to, I will adjust the way that I'm talking about this work based on what motivates them most. So I think a good example I can give is that, I've had many different CFOs in this work, but two most recent CFOs. And when I was getting our climate strategy out the door, I talked to one of our CFOs in the language of legacy because that was what really resonated with him most. He said to me,
Mm.
I want to see New Relic pushing the climate strategy forward before I am, quote, old and toothless in a rocking chair. And another CFO that I talked to is more responsive to data about cost savings and efficiency. So it's, I'm trying to drive the same outcomes. I'm using roughly the same data, but I'm packaging it differently because those two people respond really differently to different packaging.
I feel like you don't hear that legacy um, perspective very often at all. Certainly not from a CFO. Is that is that common, or you get lucky or unlucky, maybe?
I think in that case, lucky. But yeah, it's not one that I hear often. Certainly in a business context, I'm sure all of our executives have their legacy that they wish to leave. But we are laser focused on the needs of our customers, so it's best to talk to them in that language most often.
Yeah. Let's talk about the needs of your customers a little bit. I can guess two things that they need from you. One is some basic level of information, like we need to know your emissions or we need to know about your science-based target because we are insert giant customer here and we have our own goals and we need to do our own scope 3 measurements. And I guess the second thing, very related to the first, but for New Relic in particular, is like how is your product decarbonizing and how is your product um, uh, using clean energy in its operations or whatever. Are those right? Are they wrong? Or am I missing any buckets of what your customers need from you? Actually, I see a couple people on the call here, so you can try to get specific. Are both from large, or a couple people looking at it from very large software companies, use a lot of data center energy and are probably and serve large enterprises, so probably being asked for very similar things as you.
Yeah, I mean, I yeah, I think probably we could guess we're getting a lot of the same questions. And yes, you're spot on. We get requests for the information that we publish publicly about our greenhouse gas emissions and the way we are approaching those emissions and our renewable energy strategy. Um, and sometimes there's a level of bespoke questions that we get depending on the specific industry of the customer, but most often it lands somewhere in that world. And yeah, wanting to understand a little bit more about how we as a business are going about the journey of decarbonization. I think we sit in a particular niche in the market because we are so often the partner to our customers that are helping them in their cloud migration journey. So we tend to be there while they're looking at these cloud optimization strategies. And if we can be a partner to them in not only efficient cloud migration, but in making sure that that cloud migration has a sustainability focus as well, and sharing them with them our tips and tricks. I found that to be quite helpful, and we put out a lot of content about it this year to try to help our customers. So we're spending a lot of time talking about that.
Yeah, it's still it makes a lot of sense. And whenever you talk to anyone, especially in software, and we'll talk a little bit about software versus other industries, but if you talk to anyone doing climate stuff in a software company, you'll almost always find that one of the two major drivers of this work are A, compliance, and B, customer requests. And it makes a lot of sense. If you serve large enterprises have decarbonization goals, you're their supply chain, give me your emissions, yada, yada, same story all the time. However, every once in a while, including yesterday, I talked to some large, publicly traded, in the high hundreds of millions, low billions in revenue enterprise software company. And I talk about this and they say, nope, we're not losing any deals over it. Doesn't matter. Sometimes we get a request in a form, we ignore it. We're singular, we're unique. Like we really just haven't, it's just not an issue. We haven't lost a deal over it. And I know you can't speak to anything outside of New Relic necessarily, but I'm curious maybe in how you think about engaging your own supply chain or just a general comment. I know you have a lot of friends in this industry. Like, why do you think that is? Why do you think New Relic and many, many, many other companies are getting a lot of requests from customers and it is important enough to the business that you're there doing this work, whereas others just get to say, thanks, but no thanks, we're gonna skip it.
Oh, so many ways to approach that question. I mean, I will say we are now a privately traded company, so our context may be a little different, but I don't think it's probably that different. Um, I mean, when I speak to our investors today, I get nothing but indication that the work we're doing to decarbonize our business, to make our supply chain more resilient, to ensure that our systems are efficient, is anything but useful to them. Um, I get a lot of indications that, yeah, that this work will need to continue. And I think, New Relic, when we looked at developing our climate strategy and listened to the needs of our customers and looked at our set of competitors, it made sense for us to take the position that we have taken to set specific climate targets, to publish annual disclosures. We are the only observability company with a net zero by 2030 target. We are the company that our customers can come to if they themselves are on a decarbonization journey and want to be working with suppliers who are on that journey with them. So all that to say, I think I hear pretty directly from my private equity investors, and indirectly but fiercely from my customers, that the path we are on remains the right path.
Yeah. How often are you, well, how often are you in those conversations with investors and how many of their requests or not requests, how many of those conversations feel like very long term, kind of like you just described it, like, hey, we're investors for the long term, certainly now in a private company that is not a quarter to quarter investment necessarily, and this is where we see this going and it's totally worth it, versus much more short term thinking, like we only want to do things that make us more revenue next quarter or next year. Are those conversations more thoughtful and based on those long-term targets, or are they more short-term and saying, no, we only want to do things that make more revenue right now?
I mean, I think that question presupposes that those things are mutually exclusive, um, which I don't believe they are. I think that when we are doing the work of sustainability, I find that it has been most easy and most rewarding to do the work where there are shared objectives within the business. So I talked previously about the green ops work we've been doing internally. We started this transition to Graviton instances within AWS. We've written about it publicly. You can go read about it. And that was an initiative we were running for cost efficiency reasons. There are also incredible carbon emissions reasons for doing that work. So what we did was made sure that we told both of those stories and looked at both of those pieces of data, so that we know for certain that we were able to save millions of dollars in cost and also, 37% in carbon emissions for those migrated workloads. So it was a dual win. And yeah, I think in a in an environment that New Relic is in the stage of growth that we're in and in the external context in the US that we are in, it really behooves us as sustainability professionals to, yeah, look for those dual wins, look for those places where you can be an ally to your internal stakeholders, to your colleagues, and yeah, tell the story.
That's a really good example. I want to talk a little bit more about that and how that came to be and what you actually did there. Tell me more about like what the work that you actually did there was. And I'm curious at the beginning of that, was that an idea that you had that, hey, I think if we did this, it would come to this, or maybe this work was already happening and you helped Brandon to tell that story? Like, where did you come into the picture around that work and kind of walk through the specifics of that example? That's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, all credit goes to the amazing Kate Penne on our FinOps team. She is an incredible technology leader. But I have the distinct pleasure of having her on my ESG operational working group. So it's a group of about 30 people across the business that I bring together on a quarterly basis to look at how their roadmap intersects the interests of ESG. And so we develop like a shared roadmap together, and Kate's on that organizing group. And throughout the years we've figured out a lot of places within our business where there are opportunities for shared wins. And because I'm in conversation with Kate a lot, when she started doing this cost optimization work, we already were in conversation. We knew that there was likely a shared benefit there that we could talk about. So I helped supply some of the data for her to do the calculations to understand the carbon savings. And we worked together to tell the story. But yes, all credit goes to Kate for the actual work of talking to our engineering teams and running that initiative. If only I had her technical expertise, I'd be unstoppable.
How much you would accomplish. Um, how that 30-person ESG working group, what is that process like? Like what kinds of people are on there? And then how do you run a 30-person meeting with 30 different agendas? Like what is the tactical nuts and bolts of that look like?
Guess I should have brought that piece up in my discussion about my biz ops work. I'm so sorry. I have a terrible cold, so sorry for all of the coughing.
Forgiven.
So the operational working group includes relics that do the work that sort of underlies all of the pillars we have in ESG. So we have data security and trust, we have environment, we have our workforce, and then we have equitable access to tech. So that includes, of course, our people operations team, our legal team, our security team, me running sustainability, our FinOps team, as I discussed before, our social impact team, and a whole host of others. You don't need to hear me name them all, but it's a cross-functional group. And the
Mhm.
way that I started that group was that as I was building the business case for ESG, we had conversations with all of our functional leaders and had them delegate to a member of their team that would be suitable to represent kind of each pillar of the work. And from there, we came together and looked at what we were hearing from, what was on the regulatory landscape, what we were hearing from customers, what we were hearing from employees, and kind of what programs we had existing, and then built a shared roadmap. And each year we're updating that. So we're looking at, okay, what goals have we set that we need to make progress towards? What initiatives have we identified are going to help us get there? And then what other things are you doing that you think have a co-benefit here that we can be talking about? So yeah, it's a quarterly meeting. And in terms of how to ride herd on a 30-person meeting, all I have to say is like, get some facilitation skills under your belt. I spent a lot of years working on keeping people on track in gigantic meetings when they have a lot of competing priorities.
Yeah, that's impressive. That sounds like a skill I do not have, nor do I necessarily want to gain. But that's very impressive. Just a note, there's a Q&A here. So anybody can chime in there, and I should have opened the chat. So there we go. Everyone can chat. Um, everyone can chat. Everyone, perfect. Cool. I want to ask you a little bit about how you make decisions about prioritization in the work that you're doing. You talked a little about how compliance is always a driver. You talk like you just got to follow the law. Sales is a huge partner of yours. So if customers are asking for things that you can provide, that'll be really important for you. But walk me through how you make decisions, and maybe in the context of something you recently decided not to do, would be a really helpful framework. What is something that you were considering taking on? And you say, you know what, like maybe in your annual planning for next year, what you've accomplished this, and you say, you know what, just not something a one person show at a place like New Relic can accomplish this year. Walk through that decision.
Hmm. I mean, I think most of our trade-offs tend to be on internal prioritization rather than external constraints up to this point. Um, but in terms of something, I wouldn't say we've decided not to do it, but we did have, some change up of personnel on our travel team. And that's a really important strategic partner for me because we have a science-based target that focuses on our travel emissions. Um, so I've just decided to kind of pause the initiatives we've got for our travel emissions until we've got that team on board and ready to go. But that's not to say the work has stopped entirely. There's still, many teams that go into pushing an initiative related to our travel emissions forward. So I'm making sure to build the business case with the people with the teams that are fully staffed that I need to work with, starting to put the pieces into place so that when we have kind of the team that will execute on it in place, we're ready to go with all of the rest of it.
Talking about something like that, so travel, what are the specific parts of reducing travel emissions that you would want to do if you had all the bandwidth, all the team, all the budget? I heard this idea also about 3 years ago from Sophia Glock at Okta, where she was just like throwing out ideas. She was like, you know what I'd love to do on travel? I'd love to have and we talked about this, I'd love to have a carbon tax. I'd love to be able to say everyone's got a carbon budget, says this is how many emissions, per employee, different the sales teams are higher than energy teams to travel less or whatever, but if you exceed that, totally fine. Go ahead and exceed it. But you owe me a carbon tax, and I spend that on decarbonization work. I think that was like a very hopeful idea, and certainly 3 years ago, kind of idea. But talk about what you would have done around travel if you did have the resources, and then what are those travel colleagues like still chipping away at, so that when you do have the bandwidth to really pick it up in full force, you'll be able to.
Yeah, I mean, first shout out to Sophia Gluck. I was hanging out with her last week. So
We love
Sophia
Sophia.
Gluck fan club over here. But yeah, I mean, precisely that. Actually, we're looking at implementing some version of that, perhaps. But I think the key point is to really figure out how we can make the cost of our travel emissions visible to the business, because with a science-based target in place, the reality is there will be a cost to our business for travel emissions that exceed that target. And that budget cannot sit quietly with me. It needs to be woven into the way that our business works in order for it to work in perpetuity. So yes, working hard with our travel management company and with my internal partners to try to set up a way in which we can, yeah, potentially set a cost for emissions that exceed our target and piece that cost across all of our organizations. Been working hard to try to get our travel management company to build some functionality that would help all of us do it, help me do it, help Sophia do it. Yeah, because it's something that I think a lot of us
And
are
is that
all
around
going to.
better measurement of the emissions of a trip, or better
No,
ways to
that
pick a lower emissions trip, or or better ways to decide not to travel at all? Like what's the tool you'd love to have there?
I would say the measurement we've got well in hand. It's not That's not the problem set. It's more yes, helping the end user pick better trips, better ways to travel, but also showing the cost to the business, like the
Mm,
exact same way that you show the cost of the trip itself, and you theoretically have to get approval from your from your leadership in order to buy a flight, buy a hotel. Building in a way for us to get approval and show the cost of emissions when you take that trip, because the reality is, there are some teams that do need to travel from time to time, and we don't want to stop them from doing that at this point, but we need to show what the cost of that is to the business. I'd also say I've been having some really interesting conversations lately about figuring out a more like regional and fine-tuned strategy around travel. So working with my travel management company to identify routes that we are flying regularly that instead we could be using the train for in areas where train travel is more possible.
mhm,
And yeah, areas where the cost is pretty much the same to fly or to take the train, figuring out where we are often seeing a higher class of travel and seeing if we can get people more in economy or in places where they're taking multi-leg plane
mhm.
trips where we can do a nonstop. So digging into the data a little bit more, and that'd be something that I really need my new travel team to help me work on to actually change the policy that underlies all of that.
Yeah, your execs are gonna love when you tell them they can't fly first class anymore.
Yeah.
um, Campbell asked a good question here. So there are you mentioned that the development of New Relic's ESG. You mentioned the development of New Relic's ESG working group. How's the collaboration between those different groups grown over the years, and does it take a lot of time to align everyone around ESG goals? That's a great question. Like from when you came in, the team looked a little different when you came in 4 years ago. Um, but how has that broader working group matured over the last 4 years?
Hmm. Yeah, thank you. That's a really great question. So I think, let's see. Oh, but I still want to look at this question. Okay, I
Oh,
found it.
there you go.
So I think we've definitely found cross-functional collaboration. Most of the things that are happening require collaboration, like within a reporting line. It's most often happening. So that works really well. But some places we've found some good collaboration have been between our procurement and security and legal teams, for example, when we're doing supplier engagement related to our SBTI target. Around supplier engagement. So we figured out, the security team was sending out a particular survey to our suppliers. There's a way to append to that some sustainability questions that are then built back into our procurement process and used for my purposes to understand our suppliers' relationship to their carbon footprint. So that's been really good. I try to make sure in those meetings, and it is hard, that everybody is like listening and learning from one another, learning the jargon from each organization, learning a little bit about the nuances around sustainability for each colleague. Um, yeah, I think it can often be a way to pitch this is to talk to the employees about the benefit to their career, because I have actually seen so much good like collaboration and relationship building in that group. And I know that for a lot of them, adding this layer onto their skill set will be really helpful for them in the future. So that's been a good like retention technique for the people on that working group.
Yeah, so it sounds like a lot of it is making sure everyone knows that this is an everybody problem, like, and everyone hearing each other talk about this problem makes it a little less siloed, and showing them ways in which this is growing, their career could grow in this. This is going to be good for their personal career as well as their particular department. Just getting them all in a room together talking about that has been really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. And then being really to the second part of your question, Campbell, being really clear at the beginning of each year, like this initiative we're talking about levels up to this goal that we have announced publicly at the request of our customers. So this is something we do actually need to deliver on. And if we're not delivering on it, we need to know why, and we need to address the blockers or the risks to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so always tying it back to those public or highest level goals to keep it moving forward.
Yeah, you're probably going through this now, planning for next year. Usually happens around this time. So since you brought up that a lot of this is, hey, we set this public target. What are our big goals for next year? What do we prioritize? What do we work on? If you want to be specific about the things you definitely want to prioritize next year, that's great. But if not, like, how have you thought about the right priorities for next year? What do you think is going to make the cut?
Hmm. Well, we're actually on a tilted fiscal year, so we don't start fiscal year planning until like the spring.
Uh,
But
so I'm off by only 6 months.
we do have budgeting that'll start soon, and I've been thinking a lot about, I think in the last 4 years so much has changed around the way that we think about our public disclosures. And I say we in terms of the industry at large. Like when I started this, our ESG report was 52 pages long. It's shortened considerably since then, and that's not because we've cut like data out of it, or not because we didn't want to be disclosing something in particular, but I think we thought about it initially as this place to be telling every kind of story. And I've now narrowed it down to say this is really for quite a specific audience, and it's used in these specific ways. And what are the ways that we can tell these other stories elsewhere, because it doesn't all need to get crammed into the annual report. So all that to say, that's something that I'm looking at for next year. Like, how are we moving some of the time it takes me and some of the budget that we use for that into other places, because I want to make sure that I'm attending not only to the disclosures, but also making sure to leave ample time and resources for execution.
4 years ago, who was the laundry list of stakeholders you thought that, or you did make that ESG report for? And next year, who is that singular, or maybe who are the very few stakeholders you're really going to write it for? And then use other
Yeah.
mediums for other people.
I think I've mostly just refined the individuals within my stakeholder group. So it's still for our customers, it's for our employees, and it's for our investors. Like the data goes into all of the same places. It's just that I think now we've moved into an era of a little bit more like discussing machine to machine. So a lot of my report, I would imagine, is read by AI. So making it, AI readable and not spending as much time on like creating these beautiful stories that were for humans. I want to create those stories, but I want them to be in places where those humans are going to read them and interact with them and enjoy them. And I think increasingly my ESG report has become the place where I keep the critical data, and I keep, the pieces of the story that we need in there, but also figuring out how we tell a well-rounded story across all of our platforms.
I have to ask this, even though you kind of said not to. I had a question on my list here. Where's AI helped your work? And I'm going to share it, Simone. He said, please don't make me answer this. I only have rage to share. But since you brought up that AI is the one reading your reports, and I think the context there is part of the purpose of this report is so customers know New Relic is a major supplier of mine. Here's what they're doing. They are on pace to hit a target or off target, or here's their latest numbers. Like, why do I need to email Simone to get the latest numbers? Let me just pull those latest numbers. So that is one place in which AI is not, you're not using AI, but you are very aware, you are playing into the truth that other people are using AI. So you're trying to figure out how to make my thing better readable so nothing gets lost in translation of a narrative. And we're just talking about facts and data and figures and percentages that like AI was not going to mess up on a broken telephone when it shares whatever the customer needs shared, right?
Yes, that is true. I did leave out the fact that, I do want my data to get to its intended recipient. And if, AI is the way that that happens, and I'm happy for that to happen. I guess I just feeling a little bit of the AI overload at this point this year. So that was why I initially rejected the idea of this question.
You know what's happening a lot more though? I don't know if this is more or less, but I think a lot of the automation around AI also makes the in-person places so much more palatable. I think it was I hope I don't misquote her, but I'm pretty sure it was a woman. I think her name is Jessica Cohen, maybe, who runs ESG at Paramount. I gotta get her last name right. I might be wrong. But she was at a conference last week in Boston, the sustainability reporting conference, and she was talking. Somebody asked something about AI, and she was saying, "Yeah, it's kind of what you said. The report is the report, and it's so people can pull information faster." And someone said, "Well, Paramount, you guys are storytellers. Like, how will you be telling more of these stories?" And she said, "Honestly, places like this,
Hmm.
a place of a room with 300 people and a stage, and I'll be sharing what I'm learning, sharing what I'm doing, sharing what I'm working, sharing my expectations, and like going to networking events, showing up at places, like doing things in the physical universe so that AI can do its magic over there. But like, we are not going to out AI. We are going to be in these physical rooms."
Yeah, I like that reframe. I think that yes, the places where we can free humans up to do the things that humans are so good at. Those are the places where I'm happy to let AI do its thing. But yeah, I am mourning the loss of the places where humans could be rather than AI. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, that's fair. Ed asked a question here. So, regarding these stakeholder reports, what pieces of feedback or responses have most stood out over the last few years? Has the feedback changed, or how has the feedback changed over that effort?
Well, I'll approach this from two perspectives because there is a several pieces of feedback that have come directly from employees at New Relic back to me about how impactful the report is and the work of ESG has been to them and has been to their happiness at New Relic. And those pieces of feedback are truly, I keep them in a folder at my on my desktop so that I can open them when I need that little bit of extra oomph. So those have most stood out to me, but I think probably you meant in terms of like what pieces of data are most impactful for making the business case and shaping our strategy. um, I would say hearing directly from our customers on really specific items. So, a lot of us, I'm sure anonymous people in the room are reaching out to your supply chain, talking to them about your science-based targets or your net zero target or whatever. So in those contexts, when we hear really specifically from our customers that they are on a specific journey that they want us to be a part of, those pieces of feedback stand out loud and clear because they're so specific, and that's really helpful in shaping our effort. I'm happy to answer sub questions on this if I didn't answer it specifically, but
I want to talk a little bit about resilience, and I don't wanna necessarily get into the specifics, but the context here that maybe a month or two ago you published on LinkedIn a story about the importance of resilience in a business, and you talked about natural disasters and how that impacts everything from employees to data centers, and the importance of talking about resilience. And I don't need necessarily the specifics that you guys are doing, but I've heard the word resilience come up a ton this year. There was actually this Wall Street Journal article that came out sometime um, like in February or so that said, "Don't call it ESG, call it resilience." Like that was the headline of the journal. I share that one a lot. And I've heard that word come up a lot. And I've got my theories about why that's the word that's coming up a lot. But I'm curious for you and the conversations you have with your peers. A, do you agree? Has resilience been a 2025 word where it was not a 2021 through 2024 word quite as much? And B, why do you think that is?
well, I mean, actually, I attribute some of this to you. I feel like at the beginning of the year, you wrote something on LinkedIn about how you think about sustainability in a corporate context, and like if we weren't making a business case that embedded sustainability across the company, that we weren't set up to succeed. Just rough paraphrase, you can go back and quote yourself,
That's
but
correct. Yeah.
yeah, so yeah, I think we've definitely heard it in 2025. And I think I feel really strongly in certain places about the use of certain language, just broadly. I can get very pedantic about language. In this particular case, I don't care so much about the language that we use. What I want are the outcomes. And in this situation, the work that I'm doing on sustainability is to ensure that our business is resilient. The work that I described earlier on, moving on our cloud strategy, the work that we're doing to make our product more carbon efficient, the work that we're doing to understand energy use in our, small remaining offices, to understand the impacts of climate change to our employees around the world. Those are all things that will make us a resilient business. And New Relic, as a business doing what we do, we have privacy and security as by design. And I think some of the way that we already operated built in like risk mitigation and security across our business. And this is just another piece of that. So long-winded way of saying, like, yes, resilience has become the preferred term recently, but I think we were always doing this work.
That's well said. I think I think we were always doing parts of this work, but I think a lot of the work that I yesterday evening, some sustainability professor at Columbia invited me to come speak. So I did my little spiel. And I think a big part of the conversation, one of the questions that I posed is it was mostly about regulation. So it was in that frame of mind. The question I posed is the point of a regulation to make the world a better place or is it to enable free markets? And I don't know. Well, you could make either argument. You could say that governments are there to think long term and there to move the world to be a better place, and that is the point of regulation, and it moves the world forward. Or you can make the opposite argument and say regulations are there to enable a free competitive market, and a free competitive market therefore makes the world a better place. Don't know which one's right or wrong. I was not making a statement there. However, if you do lean too much towards the former, that the role of regulation is to make the world a better place, one challenge is that better place means something very different to very different people. And you saw that when better place meant something very specific under the Biden administration and something very different under the Trump administration. And I'll make you comment here. But I think I will comment on your behalf. And so I think what not on your behalf, on my behalf. So I think what that meant is that over the last 4 years, pre-election, what we were doing is following regulations and following guidelines and following principles. Not everybody, but that made the world a better place in the ways that we saw fit. And that is really important and that is really meaningful and that can drive a lot of change. And if we, the broader royal, we are aligned on what better place means, then yeah, we're all buds. If our customers want what we want and our core stakeholders and our core employees want what we want, then yeah, like that does build a better business because if we do get to this better place, then we will be a more resilient business. However, a better place means something different to a group of people, all of a sudden our resilience is off balance. Because if you are a large federal contractor, for example, you actually lose your resilience by leaning too far to that definition of better place because that impacts you somehow. So I think one of the things that has changed over the last year is that resilience has gotten a little shakier and we needed to refine it. So even though we've always been doing this work, the ground has shifted a little bit and it took some time to get our footing. And now looking forward to the next certainly 3 years and beyond, we need to say, all right, back to basics. What are the core things we have to do? What are the core things that does make our business more resilient? And if they align with what we think means a better place, then that is a wonderful thing, and we're all thrilled. And if there are places where there's tension, we can still choose that path. No one's stopping you from it, but you need to sort of lean into the tension there. You don't need to comment on the politics of it, but I'm curious if that narrative of things have changed and therefore we needed to refine resilience resonates at all, or you see it differently.
I I've not run into any of those items, we'll say yet. Yeah, the plan remains the same. Um, the work is the same. And again, I've heard, from our investors, um, that they are interested in seeing us move forward on our climate targets in particular. There's a lot under the ESG umbrella, but we'll
Mhm.
talk about that one specifically. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I see what you're saying, but I don't, that hasn't been a reality for me yet.
Good. Keep it that way. That's a good thing. Um, Amazing. Simone, I want to ask one thing to wrap it up here. But what are some things you're really trying to do that are new? What are some ways you're pushing yourself or your program where you want to learn from others or others can share how they have accomplished those things? What are some things you're working on in the next quarter or next 12 months that are relatively new to you that people can share their experiences with?
Hmm. Trying to figure out which pieces are baked enough to talk about. I mean, the thing I talked about earlier, like figuring out where our disclosure goes. Um, an amazing colleague of mine in the sustainability world last week talked about the compliance landscape right now as like Lego blocks and figuring out which Lego blocks you have and what kind of structure you're going to build with them. So I'm spending a lot of time on that, and it's new to all of us. I mean, it's new information pretty much every week at this point. um, so yeah, working on that, figuring out how to make that an efficient process at some point. Um, I mean, we are in order to comply with some upcoming regulation, we need to do some climate financial related climate related financial risk, my cold, assessment. And so that's been a new piece of work for me. We've had pieces of that at New Relic for a long time, but running it in this specific way is new. And that's been fascinating. We are using Beehive in that work. Um, what else? I want there to be some stuff on the execution side. We are doing some energy audits in our physical offices that we have around the globe to better understand what control we have because we lease our offices. What control we have, what areas we might be able to lean in with the landlord and potentially make some changes. So that's been fascinating. Never a dull day in the work of sustainability because there's always some new thing to learn, some new area of work to become an expert on overnight.
Good, as it should be. Well, hey, Simone, I appreciate it. I always love talking to you. Good to catch up 3 years down the road, from
Yeah.
sustainability snacks all the way to the Beekly. But I appreciate it. I want to share with everybody a couple of webinars that we have coming up. So we do this every single week. Next week is what we call Beehive Product Deep Dive. So it's just me talking for an hour, if you like that or not, about the product and what it does today and where it's going. On November 6th, it'll be mostly my co-founder, Ed Knutson, talking about how climate models work. He built all the climate models inside of Beehive, so you're interested in climate modeling. That's a good one. And then the famous Sophia Gluck from Okta is coming on November 20th for Inside Okta Sustainability Strategy. If any of those are interesting, would love to see you there. Simone, you rock. Have a lovely day in Portland, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks so much. Bye, everybody.
Bye, all.